A man with nothing to his name, mocked for his tattered clothes and backbreaking job. But when life handed him a broken-down shack in the middle of nowhere, no one expected what lay beneath it. This is the story of how the world's most overlooked janitor became its most unlikely millionaire. Before we dive in, hit subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. Stories like this remind us that fortune favors the humble. Don't miss what happens next. A life of quiet struggle. The fluorescent lights of the office building buzz like angry insects as Ethan Caldwell pushes mop across the linoleum floor. It was 5:45 a.m., and the only sound was the squeak of his worn-out sneakers and the slosh of dirty water. His back ached, a familiar pain after 20 years of this, but he kept going. He always kept going. Ethan was invisible. The lawyers, the executives, the receptionists who tapped away at their keyboards. They never looked at him. Not really. If they did, it was only to frown at a smudge he'd missed or to step around him like he was part of the furniture. He didn't blame them. He was just a janitor. His shift ended at 7 a.m., just as the first wave of employees arrived, their polished shoes clicking against the freshly cleaned floors. Ethan slipped out the service entrance, the morning air crisp against his face. He lived in a tiny studio apartment on the east side of town, the kind of place with thin walls and a fridge that hummed too loud. But it was home. Or at least it had been. That changed when the letter arrived. It was tucked between a water bill and a fast food coupon, the envelope thick and formal. Ethan almost threw it away, thinking it was another scam. But something made him open it. Dear Mr. Caldwell, we regret to inform you of the passing of your uncle, Franklin Caldwell. As his sole surviving relative, you are named the beneficiary of his estate, including the property located at 1873 Hollow Creek Road, Brackettville, Texas. Ethan read it 3 times. Uncle Frank, the man he hadn't seen since he was 10, when his mom had taken him to the farm one summer. All he remembered was the smell of hay, the heat of the Texas sun, and Frank's rough voice telling him to quit dawdling and help feed the chickens. Now, the man was gone, and somehow, against all odds, he'd left Ethan something. The bank teller gave him a skeptical look when he asked for a loan to fix up the place. You're telling me you want to borrow money against a farmhouse? She asked, her manicured fingers pausing over her keyboard. In Brackettville, Ethan nodded. It's mine now. I just need enough to patch the roof, maybe get the plumbing working. She sighed, like she'd heard this story before. Mr. Caldwell, with your income and credit history. She didn't finish, but the answer was clear. No. He left with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, the weight of failure settling over him. That night, he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper. He could stay here, keep scrubbing floors until his body gave out. Or he could take the one chance life had thrown at him, even if it was a crumbling shack in the middle of nowhere. 2 weeks later, he quit his job. Derek, his supervisor, actually laughed. You're serious? You're giving up a steady paycheck for some dirt farm. Ethan didn't answer. He just handed over his keys and walked out. His landlord wasn't any kinder. You'll be back, the man said, counting Ethan's final rent payment with a smirk. City boys don't last long out there. Maybe he was right. But Ethan was done being the guy everyone looked past. The drive to Brackettville took 6 hours. With each passing mile, the buildings grew fewer, the land stretching out wide and open. By the time he turned onto Hollow Creek Road, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Then he saw it. The farmhouse was worse than he remembered. The porch sagged like a tired old man. The windows were clouded with grime, and the front door hung crooked on its hinges. Weeds choked the yard, and the barn out back looked one strong wind away from collapsing. Ethan stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under his weight. Dust swirled in the air, catching the last light of the setting sun. The place smelled of mildew and old wood, of decades left untouched. He dropped his duffel bag on the floor and exhaled. This was it, his fresh start. That first night, he slept on a musty mattress he found in one of the bedrooms. The sound of the country, crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, replacing the constant hum of the city. For the first time in years, he felt something like hope. Then, just as he was drifting off, he heard it, a heavy thud from below. The basement. Ethan sat up, his heart pounding. The house was supposed to be empty. Slowly, he reached for the flashlight he'd packed, the beam cutting through the darkness as he made his way to the basement door. The hinges screamed as he pulled it open, revealing a set of rickety stairs descending into blackness. He took a deep breath and stepped down. The air was colder here, damp. His light flickered over stacks of old furniture, cardboard boxes swollen with moisture. And then, barrels, dozens of them, lined up against the far wall. Ethan's pulse quickened as he approached, running a hand over the rusted metal. One of the lids was loose. He pried it off, the sound echoing in the silence. Then his breath caught. Coins, thousands of them, gleaming in the flashlight's beam. He reached in, pulling out a handful. They were heavy, some tarnished, others startlingly bright. His fingers brushed over strange markings, dates going back over a century. This wasn't just spare change. This was a treasure, and it was his. The mocking move. Ethan sat on the cold basement floor, coins spilling through his fingers, his mind racing. The weight of what he just discovered pressed down on him harder than the dust-filled air. This couldn't be real. People like him didn't stumble into fortunes. They worked until their bodies broke, and then they worked some more. Yet here he was, surrounded by barrels of what looked like rare, possibly priceless coins. His uncle, a man he barely remembered, had left him more than a rotting farmhouse. He'd left him a mystery. Ethan carefully placed the coins back in the barrel and wiped his hands on his jeans. He needed to think. If this was real, if these coins were worth anything, he couldn't just start hauling them to the nearest pawn shop. He needed to know what he had. The morning light seeped through the grimy basement windows as Ethan climbed back upstairs, his legs stiff from sitting so long. He pulled out his phone. No service, of course. The farm was too far out for a reliable signal. He'd have to drive into town. Brackettville wasn't much. A single Main Street line with weathered buildings, a diner, a gas station, and a post office that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Ethan parked his truck outside the diner, the engine sputtering before it died. He could already feel eyes on him as he stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled, and a handful of locals at the counter turned to look. Conversations paused just long enough to make it clear he wasn't from around here. Ethan kept his head down and slid into a booth by the window. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag that read Marla approached, her pen poised over a notepad. "Coffee, please," Ethan said. "And, do you know if there's a library in town? Or somewhere with internet?" Marla gave him a once-over, taking in his worn-out jacket and scuffed boots. "Library's next to the post office. Opens at 10. She scribbled something on her pad. "You the one who moved into Frank Caldwell's place?" Ethan stiffened. "Yeah. How'd you know?" She snorted. "Small town, honey. Only news we've had this week was old man Jenkins' prize hog getting loose." She poured his coffee, the steam curling between them. Frank was a strange one. Kept to himself. Didn't much like visitors. Ethan wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "Did you know him?" "Enough to know he wasn't a friendly type." She shrugged. "Heard. He used to travel a lot, though. Came back with boxes sometimes. Never said what was in them." Ethan's pulse jumped. Boxes? Like the ones in the basement? Before he could ask more, the diner door swung open, and a man in a sheriff's uniform strolled in. The room seemed to shift, chairs scraping, voices lowering just enough to notice. The sheriff's gaze landed on Ethan, and he ambled over. "You must be the new fella," he said, tipping his hat. "Sheriff Roy Dawson." Ethan nodded. "Ethan Caldwell." Dawson smiled, didn't reach his eyes. "Frank's nephew, huh? Didn't know he had family." He slid into the booth across from Ethan without an invitation. "What brings you to Brackettville?" The question was casual, but something in Dawson's tone put Ethan on edge. "Just cleaning up the place," he said carefully. "Seeing what needs to be fixed." Dawson took a slow sip of the coffee Marla had set in front of him. Frank wasn't much for upkeep. Place is probably falling apart. Ethan forced a shrug. "I've handled worse." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then leaned in slightly. "You find anything interesting out there?" The air in the diner felt suddenly thicker. Ethan kept his face blank. "Just dust and old furniture." Dawson chuckled, but it sounded hollow. "Well, if you run into any trouble, anything unusual, you let me know. We look out for each other around here." It didn't sound like an offer. It sounded like a warning. The library was a cramped room with 2 computers, and a librarian who eyed Ethan like he might steal the books. He ignored her, pulling up search after search on rare coins, collectors, and how to tell if something was valuable. The more he read, the tighter his chest felt. Some of the coins he'd seen matched descriptions of pieces worth thousands, maybe even tens of thousands, each. And there were barrels of them. He needed an expert. Back at the farmhouse, Ethan avoided the basement. It felt too dangerous to go back down there, not with Dawson's veiled questions still ringing in his ears. Instead, he focused on making the place livable. He patched the worst of the roof leaks, scrubbed decades of grime off the windows, and cleared out the junk that had accumulated in the corners. But the coins were always in the back of his mind. A week later, he drove to San Antonio, the nearest city with a reputable coin dealer. The shop was tucked between a pawn store and a tattoo parlor. The display cases filled with gleaming silver and gold. The dealer, a man named Luis with a sharp gaze and a practiced smile, listened as Ethan described what he'd found, leaving out the part about it being barrels full. "Sounds like you might have some Morgans or peace dollars," Luis said, pulling a few examples from the case. "Depending on the year and condition, they could be worth a nice chunk." Ethan hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out one of the coins he'd smuggled out in his jacket. "Like this?" Luis's expression changed instantly. He took the coin carefully, turning it under the light. "Where did you get this?" "Family heirloom." Ethan lied. Luis studied him. "Then the coin." "This is a 1893 S. Morgan, one of the rarest." "In this condition," he whistled, "you're looking at 6 figures. Maybe more." Ethan's stomach dropped. 6 figures. For one coin. Luis leaned forward, his voice dropping. "If you have more, we should talk privately. There are collectors who would pay very well for pieces like this." Ethan's instinct screamed at him. This was too fast, too eager. He forced a smile and took the coin back. "I'll think about it." Luis's smile didn't waver, but his eyes turned cold. "Don't think too long. Things like this, they attract attention." The drive back to Bracketville was tense. Ethan kept checking his rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following him. When he pulled up to the farmhouse, the front door was slightly open. He'd locked it. He knew he'd locked it. Ethan's hand shook as he reached for the tire iron under his seat. Slowly, he stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Nothing seemed out of place, but the air felt different, like someone had been there, breathing in his space, touching his things. Then he saw it. A single coin, placed neatly in the center of the kitchen table. One he hadn't brought with him. They knew. The basement secret. Ethan stared at the coin on the table, his fingers curling into fists. It wasn't one of his. He hadn't left it there, which meant someone had been inside the house. Someone who knew about the coins. His first instinct was to check the basement. He grabbed the tire iron from his truck and moved quietly through the house, every creak of the floorboards making his pulse spike. The basement door was still closed, the lock intact. He exhaled slowly. Maybe they hadn't found the barrels yet, but they would. He needed to move fast. The next morning, Ethan drove back into Bracketville, this time with a different goal. He stopped at the hardware store and bought heavy-duty padlocks for the basement door, a motion sensor light for the porch, and a cheap security camera he could rig up near the driveway. It wouldn't stop anyone determined, but it might make them think twice. As he loaded his supplies into the truck, he caught sight of Sheriff Dawson leaning against his cruiser across the street, watching him. Ethan forced himself to nod casually, like he hadn't just spent the night jumping at every sound. Dawson pushed off the car and ambled over. "Stocking up, I see." His eyes flicked to the locks in Ethan's hands. "Expecting trouble?" Ethan shrugged. "Old house. Just being careful." Dawson nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "Well, like I said, anything unusual happens, you call me." He held it out. Day or night. Ethan took the card, the sheriff's gaze heavy on him. There was something in Dawson's tone, not quite a threat, but not quite friendly either, like he was waiting for Ethan to slip up. Appreciate it, Ethan said, sliding the card into his pocket without looking at it. Dawson smirked, tipped his hat, and walked away. Back at the farmhouse, Ethan installed the locks and camera, his nerves frayed. Every sound, the wind in the trees, a distant animal call, made him tense. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. That night, he sat at the kitchen table with a flashlight and the coin left by his uninvited visitor. It was different from the ones in the basement, newer, shinier. A message, maybe, or a warning. He turned it over in his fingers, then froze. There was a tiny mark scratched into the metal near the edge. A symbol. A letter? He squinted. It looked like AC. The next day, Ethan drove an hour north to the nearest big box store and bought a safe, a heavy, fireproof thing that took 2 men to load into his truck. He also grabbed a stack of coin sleeves and reference books. If he was going to figure out what he had, he needed to do it carefully. Back home, he hauled the safe into the bedroom and bolted it to the floor. Then, heart pounding, he finally let himself go back down into the basement. The barrels were still there, untouched. He pried open the first one and carefully lifted out a handful of coins, examining each under the beam of his flashlight. Morgans, peace dollars, even a few foreign pieces mixed in. His hands shook as he sorted them into piles on an old workbench. Hours passed. The more he looked, the more he realized just how much was here. And not just coins. Some of the barrels had old documents, yellowed envelopes stuffed with receipts, even a few small, intricately carved boxes. One box, made of dark wood, caught his eye. It was heavier than it looked. He pried it open. Inside was a single key and a folded piece of paper. Ethan's breath hitched as he unfolded it. If you're reading this, you found what I left behind. Don't trust anyone, especially not the sheriff. The note was signed with a single, shaky letter, F. Frank. Ethan's head spun. What the hell had his uncle been involved in? He turned the key over in his palm. It was small, tarnished brass, with no markings. A safe deposit box, maybe? A floorboard creaked overhead. Ethan went still. Someone was in the house. A dangerous inheritance. The creak came again, slow, deliberate, not the settling of an old house. Footsteps. Ethan's grip tightened around the tire iron he'd brought downstairs with him. He clicked off his flashlight, plunging the basement into darkness. His pulse roared in his ears as he listened. Another step. Closer. Then silence. Had they left? Or were they standing still, listening just like him? A floorboard groaned directly above the basement door. Ethan's breath caught. He needed to move. Now. He stuffed the key and note into his pocket and crept toward the far corner of the basement where an old coal chute led outside. It was narrow, barely wide enough for his shoulders, but it was his only way out without crossing paths with whoever was upstairs. Dust and cobwebs clung to his face as he wriggled through, the metal groaning under his weight. Fresh air hit him as he tumbled out behind the house, landing hard in the overgrown grass. He didn't stop to look back. Ethan sprinted for the tree line, ducking behind a thick oak just as the farmhouse's back door swung open. A figure stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, face obscured by a baseball cap. Not Dawson. Someone else. The man scanned the yard, then pulled out a phone and muttered something into it. Ethan didn't wait to hear more. He slipped deeper into the woods, branches snapping underfoot as he angled toward town. He needed help, and there was only one person in Bracketville who might give it. Marla's diner was nearly empty when Ethan stumbled in, sweat-soaked and shaking. The waitress took one look at him and wordlessly poured a cup of coffee, sliding it across the counter along with a clean napkin. "Wipe your face," she muttered. "You look like hell." Ethan dabbed at the dirt and scratches, his hands still unsteady. "I need to ask you something. About my uncle." Marla's eyes flicked toward the kitchen, then back to him. She leaned in. "You got 5 minutes before the lunch rush. Talk fast. Did Frank have enemies? Anyone who want to hurt him?" She barked a laugh. Frank Caldwell made enemies breathing honey, but her smile faded when she saw Ethan's expression. Look, he wasn't a bad man, just private, and he didn't like people poking around his business. What kind of business? Marla hesitated. Then, voice barely above a whisper, he used to run with the Cortez brothers back in the 90s. Coin smuggling. Got out before the feds cracked down, but some folks never forgot. The name hit Ethan like a punch. Cortez. The C on the coin. Before he could ask more, the diner door banged open. Sheriff Dawson strolled in, his boots scraping against a worn tile. Well, if it isn't our newest resident, Dawson drawled. He slid onto the stool next to Ethan, too close. Heard you had some excitement out at the farm. Ethan's throat went dry, just doing repairs. Dawson's smile didn't reach his eyes. He pulled something from his pocket and set it on the counter. A brass key, identical to the one in Ethan's pocket. Funny thing, the sheriff said. Found this in Frank's effects after he passed. Thought you might know what it opens. Marla dropped the plate with a clatter, her face pale. Ethan stared at the key. A test. A trap. Never seen it before, he lied. Dawson studied him for a long moment. Then he pocketed the key and stood. You let me know if that changes, Caldwell. Small towns, they don't take kindly to secrets. The bell jingled as he left. Marla exhaled sharply. You're in it now, city boy. Ethan's coffee had gone cold. He pushed it away. He needed to find out what that key unlocked before someone else did. The lockbox. The key burned a hole in Ethan's pocket all the way back to the farmhouse. Sheriff Dawson knew something. The intruder knew something. Even Marla seemed to know more than she was letting on. But Ethan, he was stumbling in the dark, one step behind everyone else. He parked his truck behind the barn instead of the house, just in case someone was watching. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the overgrown yard as he crept toward the back porch, scanning for signs of disturbance. The door was still locked, the security camera undisturbed. But that didn't mean anything. Inside, the house was silent. Ethan checked every room, tire iron in hand, before finally allowing himself to breathe. Whoever had been here earlier was gone, for now. He pulled the key from his pocket and turned it over in his fingers. Small, unremarkable. The kind of key that could open anything from a diary to a safe deposit box. Frank's note echoed in his mind. Don't trust anyone, especially not the sheriff. Ethan needed answers, and there was only one place to start. The Bracketville Historical Society was housed in a crumbling brick building that had once been the town's first bank. A faded sign above the door boasted, "ST 1889, in peeling gold letters. Ethan pushed inside, the scent of old paper and dust thick in the air. A woman with silver hair and round glasses looked up from a stack of files. Can I help you? I'm researching my uncle, Ethan said. Frank Caldwell. The woman's expression shifted, something between recognition and wariness. Ah, Frank. She adjusted her glasses. I'm Eleanor Whitmore. Knew your uncle a long time. Ethan leaned forward. Did he ever mention a key or a safe deposit box? Eleanor studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Follow me. She led him to a back room lined with filing cabinets. From a drawer marked Private Holdings, she pulled a yellowed envelope. Inside was a photograph of the old bank's vault, the kind with individual boxes for rent. Frank rented Box 117 here from 1982 until his death. Eleanor said quietly, paid in cash every year. Never missed a payment. Ethan's pulse quickened. Is it still here? She hesitated. The boxes were moved to the new bank in 95. But, she lowered her voice. Box 117 wasn't among them. Rumor was Frank emptied it himself the night before the transfer. Ethan frowned. Then where? A loud bang from the front of the building cut him off. Eleanor's eyes widened. Go, she whispered, shoving the photo into his hands. Out the back. Ethan didn't argue. He slipped through the rear exit just as the front door crashed open, voices echoing through the building. One stood out, Sheriff Dawson's drawl, sharp with impatience. Where is he, Eleanor? Ethan ran. The farmhouse felt less like a refuge and more like a trap as Ethan paced the kitchen. The key, the missing box, the Cortez brothers. It was all connected. He just couldn't see how. He pulled out the photograph Eleanor had given him. The vault's layout was clear, each box numbered. His eyes caught on something scribbled in the margin. Coordinates maybe, and a single word, barn. Ethan's head snapped up. The old barn had been the one place he hadn't searched thoroughly, its interior swallowed by shadows and decades of neglect. He grabbed a flashlight and ran. The barn door groaned in protest as he forced it open. Dust swirled in the beam of his light as he stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of hay and rust. Then he saw it. Half buried in the dirt floor near the back wall was a metal plate. Ethan dropped to his knees, brushing away decades of grime. Beneath it, a lock. His hands shook as he fit the key into the mechanism. It turned with a satisfying click. The plate lifted away, revealing a rusted metal box beneath. Ethan hauled it out, his muscles straining at the weight. Whatever was inside, Frank had wanted it hidden and safe. The latch opened with a screech. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a stack of documents and a single, gleaming gold coin unlike any in the basement. Ethan lifted it carefully. The moment the light hit the surface, he understood. Engraved on the coin was a ship, and below it, a single word, Atacha. Ethan's breath left his lungs. The Atacha was one of the most famous shipwrecks in history. A Spanish galleon lost in 1622, carrying a fortune in gold and silver. Recovered treasure from it had sold for millions. And if this coin was real, a floorboard creaked behind him. Ethan spun, flashlight raised, just as a familiar figure stepped into the beam. Sheriff Dawson smiled, his gun leveled at Ethan's chest. "Frank always said you were a smart kid," he drawled. "Pity you didn't stay away." The sheriff's gambit. The barrel of Dawson's revolver gleamed in the flashlight's beam, steady as a surgeon's scalpel. Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe. Somewhere in the darkness, a rat scuttled through the hay. "Set the coin down, Caldwell." Dawson's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Slow now." Ethan lowered the Atacha piece onto the velvet lining, his mind racing. The sheriff had followed him, had been watching the whole time. Dawson stepped closer, his boots crunching on the dirt floor. 20 years I waited for Frank to lead me to the rest of it," he said. Had half the department convinced he died without a dime. A humorless chuckle. "Then you showed up." "The rest of it." Ethan's gaze flicked to the metal box. There had to be more. Something Dawson wanted badly enough to pull a gun over. The sheriff followed his look and smirked. "Oh, I don't care about the shipwreck coins. Let the historians drool over those." He nudged the box with his boot. "It's the ledger I want." "Ledger?" Dawson's patience snapped. He grabbed the box and appended it. Papers fluttering to the ground. A slim black notebook thudded atop the pile, its pages brittle with age. The sheriff holstered his gun just long enough to snatch it up. When he flipped it open, Ethan caught a glimpse of columns, dates, amounts, initials. "Frank's insurance policy," Dawson muttered. "Every bribe, every payoff in the Cortez operation. My name's in here 6 times. His jaw tightened. Should have burned this when I had the chance. A cold realization settled over Ethan. Dawson wasn't just after treasure. He was covering his tracks. The sheriff's hand drifted back toward his holster. "Pity you had to go poking around. Folks say you cracked under pressure. Another city boy who couldn't handle the quiet life." Ethan's fingers found the tire iron beside him, hidden in the hay. Dawson's smile didn't reach his eyes as he drew his weapon. "Any last?" Ethan swung. The iron connected with Dawson's wrist in a sickening crack. The gun went off, the shot deafening in confined space as it buried itself in the rafters. Ethan didn't wait. He dove for the fallen weapon, his fingers closing around the grip just as Dawson tackled him. They rolled across the dirt, the sheriff's good hand clawing at Ethan's face. The gun skittered away. Dawson landed a punch to Ethan's ribs that drove the air from his lungs. Stars exploded across his vision as his head smacked the ground. Through the haze, he saw the sheriff lunge for the revolver. Ethan kicked out blindly. His boot connected with Dawson's knee. A pop of cartilage, a howl of pain. He scrambled up, blood hot in his mouth, and snatched the ledger from where it had fallen. Dawson was already moving, dragging his injured leg behind him as he reached for the gun. Ethan ran. The truck's engine roared to life as Ethan fishtailed down the driveway. In the rear-view mirror, Dawson emerged from the barn, weapon raised. 2 shots rang out. The passenger window exploded in a shower of glass. Ethan ducked, the wheel jerking in his hands as the truck clipped a fence post. He fought for control, gravel spitting beneath the tires as he hit the main road. Only then did he risk a glance at the ledger on the seat beside him. The pages fluttered in the wind, revealing line after line of damning entries. Asterisk, July 12, 1994. $25,000 to R.D. for evidence disposal. Asterisk, September 3rd, 1995. $40,000 to R.D. for witness protection override. Asterisk, R.D. Roy Dawson. Ethan's hand shook on the wheel. He needed to get this to someone who could use it. But who? The sheriff's department was clearly compromised. The answer came in a flash of memory. Eleanor Whitmore's knowing look when she'd mentioned the Cortez brothers. She'd known more than she'd said. He turned the truck toward town. The Historical Society was dark when Ethan arrived, but a light glowed in the back window. He pounded on the door until Eleanor appeared, her face pale. "You," she breathed. Then, seeing his split lip and the blood on his shirt. "Dear God. Dawson?" Ethan thrust the ledger at her. He killed Frank, or had him killed. Eleanor's hands trembled as she took the book. She didn't need to open it to understand. "I always suspected," she whispered, after the Cortez brothers disappeared. A siren wailed in the distance. "Close." Eleanor grabbed Ethan's arm. "There's a storm cellar out back. Go. Now." Ethan hesitated. "They'll come after you." Her smile was grim. "Let them try. I've been waiting 20 years to see Roy Dawson in handcuffs." The sirens grew louder. Ethan ran for the cellar just as headlights swept the street. He dropped into the darkness below, pulling the hatch shut behind him. Above, tires screeched to a halt. Doors slammed. Dawson's voice, tight with pain and rage. "Where is he, Eleanor?" Ethan held his breath in the dark. The game had changed, and for the first time, the sheriff wasn't holding all the cards. The storm cellar. The damp earth smell of the storm cellar filled Ethan's nostrils as he pressed his back against the dirt wall. Above him, boots pounded across the wooden porch of the Historical Society. Dawson's voice, sharp with pain and fury, cut through the night. "Tear this place apart if you have to. He's here somewhere." Ethan's fingers dug into the ledger still clutched in his hands. He should have left it with Eleanor. Now, if Dawson found him, the evidence would disappear forever, along with Ethan. A sliver of moonlight seeped through the cellar door's cracks as someone stepped onto it. The wood groaned under their weight. Ethan held his breath. Then Eleanor's voice, steel-wrapped in southern sweetness. "You boys looking for something? Because unless you've got a warrant, this is breaking and entering." A younger deputy stammered. We got reports of disturbance." "From who?" Eleanor snapped. "Roy Dawson got the whole department out past midnight chasing ghosts." Silence. Then Dawson's growl. "Enough. Johnson, check the back. Miller, the cellar." Ethan's pulse spiked. He scanned the cramped space. No exits. No weapons except the ledger itself. He could rush the deputy when the door opened, but with Dawson and others outside, he'd never make it far. The cellar latch clicked. Ethan braced himself. A gunshot cracked through the night. Not from above. From the street. "Sheriff, we got company," someone shouted. The weight lifted off the cellar door as running footsteps pounded away. Ethan risked peeking through the cracks. 2 black SUVs had boxed and patrol cars, their headlights blinding. Men in tactical gear fanned out with military precision. And standing in the glare, hands raised in mock surrender, was Luis, the coin dealer from San Antonio. "Evening, officers." Luis called, "We're here for Mr. Caldwell." And before you ask, he held up a folded paper. Federal warrant. Dawson's face twisted. "Bullshit. You're Cortez's lapdog." Luis's smile went cold. Funny, I was about to say the same thing about you. Ethan didn't wait to see the standoff play out. While all eyes were on the SUVs, he shoved the cellar door open and rolled into shadows behind the building. A hand clamped over his mouth. "Quiet," Marla hissed, dragging him behind a dumpster. She thrust a set of car keys into his palm. "My Chevy's around back. Go to the old Miller place on Route 12. It's abandoned. Stay there till sunrise, then head for the state line." Ethan stared at her. "Why are you helping me?" Marla's eyes flicked toward the street where Dawson and Luis were now shouting over each other. "Because Frank was the only decent man I ever knew," she whispered. "And you're the only chance left to clear his name." She shoved him toward the alley just as another shot rang out. Ethan ran. The Chevy's engine turned over with a shudder. Ethan kept the lights off as he peeled away. The ledger splayed open on the passenger seat. In the chaos, he grabbed a handful of loose pages. Enough to damn Dawson, but not the whole story. He flipped through them as he drove, the words blurring in the moonlight. Asterisk March 15th, 1995, $75,000 to RD for safe passage of shipment number 417. Asterisk April 2nd, 1995, $30,000 to RD for lost evidence Cortez warehouse fire. Asterisk. But one entry near the end stopped him cold. Asterisk May 10th, 1995, $150,000 to RD for permanent solution to CC problem. No witnesses this time. Asterisk. CC. Carlos Cortez? The Miller place loomed ahead. A sagging farmhouse, even more derelict than Frank's. Ethan parked behind a collapsed barn and slipped inside through a broken window. The interior smelled of mildew and rot. He barricaded the door with a rusted stove and settled against the far wall. The ledger pages spread before him. Somewhere in these numbers was the truth about Frank's death, about why Dawson wanted the ledger so badly, and maybe a floorboard creaked upstairs. Ethan froze. He wasn't alone. Slow footsteps descended the staircase. A shadow moved through the moonlight. Then a voice, smooth as aged whiskey. "You've been busy, Mr. Caldwell." Louis stepped into view, a pistol loose in his grip. But it was a man behind him who made Ethan's blood run cold, an older version of the photos he'd seen in Eleanor's files. Mateo Cortez, the last surviving brother. And he was smiling. The Cortez proposition. The moonlight streaming through the broken windows painted silver streaks across Mateo Cortez's face, deepening the scars that ran from his temple to his jaw. He moved like a man used to power, his tailored suit at odds with the rotting farmhouse around them. Frank's nephew, Mateo mused, circling Ethan like a shark. "I wonder if he'd show up eventually." Ethan's back pressed against the wall, the ledger pages crumpling in his grip. Luis's pistol hadn't wavered. "You killed my uncle," Ethan said, the words thick in his throat. Mateo laughed, a sound like gravel in a tin can. "If I wanted Frank dead, he wouldn't have lasted 20 years. He plucked one of the pages from Ethan's hand, scanning it. "No, that honor belongs to your friend the sheriff." A moth batted against a lone light bulb overhead, casting jerky shadows. "Dawson worked for you," Ethan said. "For us?" Mateo scoffed. "Roy Dawson only works for Roy Dawson." He tapped the ledger page. "This shows payments because Frank was tracking them. My brother Carlos was the one who brought Dawson into the operation. By the time we realized he was skimming shipments and killing witnesses." He spread his hands. "Well, let's just say the Atacha coins were supposed to be our retirement." Ethan's mind raced. "The coins in Frank's basement were half of what we recovered in '94, Mateo finished. "The other half? Dawson has them. Or had. We've been waiting for him to lead us to the stash." His smile turned predatory. "Until you dug up the ledger." Luis shifted impatiently. "Boss, we should." A gunshot split the night. The light bulb exploded in a shower of glass. Ethan hit the floor as more shots rang out. From outside, from upstairs. Luis dragged Mateo behind an overturned table just as the front door burst open. Sheriff Dawson stood silhouetted in the doorway, a shotgun smoking in his hands. 3 deputies fanned out behind him. Well, look at this, Dawson drawled. A family reunion. Mateo didn't flinch. Roy, still stealing from dead men, I see. Dawson's smile didn't reach his eyes. He leveled the shotgun at Ethan. Hand over the rest of that ledger, Caldwell. Ethan's fingers brushed the pages scattered on the floor. The permanent solution, entry lay face up near his knee. You killed Carlos Cortez, Ethan said slowly. And Frank knew. The shotgun twitched. Frank should have stayed out of it. A deputy's radio crackled to life. Sheriff, we got state troopers coming up Route 12. Dawson didn't hesitate. He fired. Ethan rolled as the buckshot tore into the wall where his head had been. Mateo and Luis returned fire, driving Dawson back into the night. Move! Mateo grabbed Ethan's arm, shoving him toward the kitchen. There's a root cellar. Another shotgun blast. Mateo grunted as red bloomed across his shoulder. Luis dragged them both through the doorway, just as Dawson's voice roared. Burn it down. Ethan barely had time to register the words before the world tilted. Luis yanked open a hidden hatch, and they tumbled down into darkness. Above them, glass shattered. The acrid stench of gasoline filled the air. Then the whoosh of flames. This way, Luis hissed, dragging the bleeding Mateo through the narrow tunnel. Ethan followed, the heat licking at his back as fire consumed the house above. The tunnel emptied into a dry creek bed 50 yards from the burning farmhouse. Sirens wailed in the distance as Luis hauled Mateo toward a waiting sedan. Ethan didn't move. Coming, Luis called. Flames reflected in Mateo's eyes as he studied Ethan. You have a choice now, boy. Walk away and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. He tossed something through the air. Ethan caught it. A brass key, different from Frank's. Or meet me at this address tomorrow, Mateo finished. We both want the same thing. The sedan peeled away just as state police cruisers skidded into the yard. Ethan pocketed the key and ran for the tree line as the Miller place collapsed in a shower of sparks. One thought burned brighter than the flames. Dawson had tried to kill them all, and that meant the ledger wasn't just evidence. It was a death warrant. The trap. Dawn painted the sky in shades of bruised purple as Ethan crouched behind a rusted tractor in an abandoned soybean field. The key Mateo had given him dug into his palm, a Chicago address etched into its bow. 500 miles north, a lifetime away from Brackettville. His truck was still at the Miller place, probably reduced to a charred husk by Dawson's fire. His phone lost in the chaos. Every muscle ached, and the smell of smoke clung to his clothes like a second skin. But he was alive. For now, the ledger pages had survived, carefully folded in his back pocket. He smoothed them across his knee, the morning light revealing what he'd missed before. A single entry, dated 2 weeks before Frank's death. Asterisk June 1st, 2023. Final payment RD, $500,000 for storage fees. Location, Red Oak. Asterisk. Ethan's breath caught. Red Oak wasn't a code name. It was a place. The old Red Oak Baptist Church, 10 miles east of town. Frank had taken him there once as a kid to fish in the creek behind it. The church had been abandoned for years. Perfect for hiding stolen treasure. A engine's growl cut through the morning quiet. Ethan ducked lower as a black SUV rolled down the farm road, dust swirling behind it. Not police. Not Dawson. Mateo's men. The SUV stopped 50 yards away. The passenger window rolled down, and a familiar voice called out, "You planning to walk to Chicago, Caldwell?" Marla leaned across the seat, her hair tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail. A shotgun rested against her thigh. Ethan didn't move. "You work for Cortez?" "I work for me," she corrected. "But right now our interests align. Get in." The SUV smelled of gun oil and cheap coffee. Marla tossed him a burner phone and a clean shirt as they pulled onto the highway. "Dawson's got roadblocks on every route out of the county," she said. "State police are helping. Guess that federal warrant Louis flashed was as fake as a smile." Ethan scrolled through the phone's contacts. Only one number saved. MC. "Mateo wants to meet," Marla continued. "But there's something you should see first." She took a sharp left onto a dirt road. the SUV bouncing through overgrown brush until Red Oak Church's steeple came into view, or what was left of it. The church was a skeleton of its former self. The roof caved in, the walls scorched black. Fresh tire marks cut through the tall grass leading to the basement doors, which hung open like a gaping mouth. Marla killed the engine. We got here an hour ago. Dawson beat us to it. Ethan's stomach dropped. He was out of the vehicle before she could stop him, sprinting toward the ruins. The basement was empty. Not just empty, cleaned. The concrete floor had been power washed recently, the scent of bleach overpowering. Only a single object remained in the center of the space, a sheriff's department badge, pinned to the wall with a hunting knife. Dawson's. It's a message, Marla said from the doorway. For Mateo. For you. He's not hiding anymore. Ethan's fingers found the ledger pages in his pocket. The final entry taunted him. Final payment. Not for storage. For silence. Dawson had taken the coins, and now he was tying up loose ends. The burner phone buzzed. A text from MC. Change of plans. Dawson's heading to the airstrip outside Laredo. Private plane fueled and waiting. You want the truth? Meet me there. Ethan looked at Marla. How far to Laredo? 2 hours, she said. If we hurry. And if it's a trap? Marla racked a shotgun. Then we'll be the ones springing it. The SUV roared to life as Ethan typed a reply. On my way. Somewhere to the south, a plane waited, and on it, the man who'd killed his uncle. The ledger pages crinkled in his grip as the church disappeared behind them. This wasn't about treasure anymore. It was about justice. Justice at 30,000 feet. The airstrip outside Laredo looked more like a forgotten stretch of road than a functioning airport. A single hangar crouched in the desert heat, its corrugated metal walls shimmering under the midday sun. Beside it, a sleek white jet waited, engines already whining to life. Marla killed the SUV's engine a mile out, letting the vehicle coast behind a ridge of sun-bleached rocks. That's Cortez's plane, she muttered. Binoculars trained on the tarmac. Dawson must have stolen it. Ethan counted 4 figures moving between the hangar and the jet. 3 looked like hired muscle. The 4th, tall, limping slightly, could only be Dawson. Even from this distance, the sheriff moved like a man who knew the clock was running out. Marla handed Ethan the shotgun. You sure about this? The ledger pages burned in his pocket. Frank's note echoed in his mind. Don't trust anyone. But this wasn't about trust anymore. It was about ending what his uncle had started. Stay here, Ethan said, if this goes wrong. Bullshit. Marla racked around into her pistol. Frank was my friend, too. They moved low and fast through the scrub brush, the heat rising in visible waves from the tarmac. The roar of the jet's engines covered their approach until they were 50 yards out. Then, a shout from a hangar. Too late. Ethan sprinted for the plane as gunfire erupted behind him. Marla's pistol answered, her shots driving Dawson's men behind cover. The jet's stairs were already retracting when Ethan lunged, his fingers catching the edge of the door as it began to close. A boot connected with his ribs. Pain exploded through his side as he tumbled into the cabin, rolling to avoid the next kick. Dawson loomed over him, a snub-nosed revolver in one hand, a metal briefcase in the other. Should have stayed gone, Caldwell. The sheriff's smile was all teeth. The plane lurched forward, accelerating down the runway. Ethan grabbed a seat back to steady himself as Dawson leveled the gun. You killed my uncle, Ethan gasped. For what? A pile of coins. Dawson laughed. For freedom. 30 years wearing that badge, playing by their rules. Frank understood. Right up until he got sentimental. He thumbed back the hammer. Just like you. The gunshot was deafening in confined space. But it wasn't Dawson's. A dark bloom spread across the sheriff's chest as he looked down in shock. Behind him, Mateo Cortez stepped from the cockpit, a smoking pistol in his hand. Hello, Roy, Mateo said. You forgot to check the pilot. Dawson collapsed against the bulkhead, his breath coming in wet gasps as the plane lifted off. The briefcase fell open, spilling Atacha coins across the cabin floor. Ethan scrambled for the ledger pages, thrusting them at Mateo. It's all here, every payment. every murder. Mateo barely glanced at them. I know. Carlos was my brother. He kicked Dawson's revolver away. But this is for Frank. The plane banked sharply, sunlight flashing through windows. Below, the desert stretched endlessly, a sea of sand and scrub. Somewhere down there, Marlo was waiting. And in Ethan's hands, the truth. Ethan's journey proves that even the quietest among us can change the world when it matters most. If this story inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life tales of courage and redemption. Because you never know, your own moment to rise might be just around the corner. The screen fades to black as the jet shrinks in the distance, sunlight glinting off its wings like a coin tossed into the sky.